get comfortable. Tonight we are going to spend Christmas in a great English house in the 1880s, and we are going to spend the whole of it, not just the day. For the Christmas of a grand Victorian household was not a single morning of presents, but a long unfolding season, weeks of preparation and days of festivity, running from the first gathering of the greenery to the last candle of Twelfth Night. And we are going to live through the whole of it, slowly, from the inside. You have a picture of a Victorian Christmas already, most likely, because we all do. It is the picture the Victorians themselves made and handed down to us. The tree hung with candles, the holly and the ivy, the great dinner, the plum pudding carried in a flame, the snow outside and the fire within, the whole warm golden scene that we still, more than a century later, reach for every December without quite knowing that we are reaching for something the Victorians built. For the Christmas we keep is very largely a Victorian Christmas, invented or revived or transformed in these very decades. And to go back to a grand house in the 1880s is to go back to the making of the thing itself, to see it fresh in the age that gave it to us. Before we go any further, if you enjoy this kind of history, the warm and close and human kind, take a moment to subscribe and to leave a like. It helps this small channel more than you would think. And if you would like to, leave a comment telling me where you are listening from, and what the hour is where you are, and whether it is winter where you are or summer. I always like to know who is out there in the quiet. Now let the room around you grow still, and let us go back. It is December, in the 1880s. The place is England, the country, a great house set in its park, the home of a wealthy family, with its many rooms and its many servants and its wide estate around it. The days are short, and the nights are long and cold. The trees are bare, and there may be snow, or the threat of it, in the heavy grey sky. And inside the great house, the preparations for Christmas have already begun. For a Christmas on this scale did not simply happen. It was made over weeks by many hands, most of them the hands of servants, and the making of it was as much a part of the season as the keeping of it. We are going to watch it all. The long preparation, the gathering of the greenery, and the making of the puddings, and the readying of the house, the coming of the guests, and the decking of the rooms, Christmas Eve with its tree and its carols, Christmas Day itself with its church and its great dinner, and its gathering of the family, and the long tale of the season after, the Boxing Day that belonged to the servants, the games and the festivities, the servants' ball, and the last night of all, Twelfth Night, when the greenery came down and the season ended. All of it, the whole of a grand Victorian Christmas, from the inside slowly, warm against the winter dark. Let us begin, some weeks before the day, with the making of it. Here is the thing to understand before we begin, the fact that changes how you see everything that follows, and it is this. The Christmas we think of as ancient and timeless was, in large part, made by the Victorians, and made in living memory of the people in this house. We imagine that Christmas has always been kept as we keep it, that the tree and the cards and the great family dinner and the whole warm apparatus of the season stretch back unchanged into the depths of time. But it is not so. Christmas had been, for a long time before the Victorians, a much smaller and quieter, and in some places almost neglected thing. The old medieval Christmas, with its 12 days of feasting and misrule, had faded. In the harder years of the earlier centuries, it had been actively suppressed in places, thought too riotous, too pagan, too idle. And by the beginning of the Victorian age, Christmas was, in many English homes, a modest occasion, a day marked, but not the great festival we know. And then, across the middle decades of the 19th century, it was remade, and remade into very nearly the thing we keep today. The Christmas tree came, brought from Germany, made fashionable by the royal family, spreading through the homes of the land. The Christmas card was invented, and the Christmas cracker. The great family dinner took its modern shape. The old customs were revived and polished and sentimentalized, the carols collected and sung. The whole season gathered up and reinvented as the warm domestic family festival that we now think of as timeless. And a writer named Charles Dickens, with a small book about a mean old man and the ghosts who visited him one Christmas Eve, did as much as anyone to fix the new Christmas in the heart of the age, the Christmas of warmth and generosity and family and home. So the family in our great house, keeping their grand Christmas in the 1880s, were not keeping an ancient, unchanging rite. They were keeping a festival that had been made new within the lifetimes of the older people among them. A festival still fresh, still settling into its forms, the modern Christmas in the very decades of its making. And that gives the whole thing a particular quality, a sense of a tradition being lived into being. The warm, familiar Christmas we know taking shape in these very rooms, in these very years, in the golden candlelit season we are about to enter. Keep that in mind as we go, that you are watching not an old thing, but a new one, the Christmas of the modern world being made in a grand English house in the 1880s and handed down through all the years between to you, keeping it still. Let us begin then, weeks before the day, with the long preparation, and see how a great house made its Christmas. The Christmas of a great house began, in truth, weeks before Christmas Day, in the kitchen, with the making of the puddings, for the great rich boiled puddings that were the center of the Christmas feast could not be made at the last minute. They had to be made ahead and left to mature, and the making of them was one of the first signs in the life of the house that the season was coming. There was a Sunday, some 5 weeks before Christmas, that the church calendar marked with a prayer that began with the words "stir up," and it fell at just the moment when the Christmas puddings needed to be made if they were to be ready. And so it came to be called, in the households of England, Stir Up Sunday, the day the puddings were made. And the making of them was a considerable business, for a great house made many, for the family, and for the servants, and for the whole Christmas season. And the mixing of them was a labor of the whole kitchen. The Christmas pudding was a dense, rich thing, made of sweat and dried fruit and breadcrumbs and spices and sugar, bound with eggs and moistened with brandy or ale. An enormous quantity of rich ingredients mixed together into a heavy, dark batter and boiled for hours in a cloth. And there were customs attached to the making. Every member of the household might take a turn at stirring the mixture, and the stirring was done by tradition from east to west, in memory of the journey of the wise men. Small silver charms and coins were stirred into the mixture, to be found by the lucky in their portion on the day. A silver coin for wealth, a thimble, a ring, and a wish was made by each who stirred. The making of the pudding was half cookery and half ritual, the whole household taking its turn at the bowl. The wishes made, the charms stirred in, weeks before the day. And once made, the puddings were boiled for hours and hours in the great coppers, filling the kitchen with their steam and their smell. And then they were set aside, hung in their cloths in the larder, to mature through the weeks until Christmas, growing richer and darker as they waited. The making of the puddings was the first act of Christmas in the great house, weeks ahead, and from that day the kitchen turned steadily toward the season. The puddings maturing in the larder, a standing sign that Christmas was coming, that the great feast was being prepared, that the long work of making the season had begun. And the puddings were only the beginning of the kitchen's long preparation. For there were the cakes to be made, the great rich Christmas cakes, and the mincemeat for the mince pies, and all the rich baking of the season, much of it made ahead and stored, so that the weeks before Christmas were a steady mounting labor in the kitchen, the making and the storing of the rich foods of the feast, the larder filling with the puddings and the cakes and the preserves, and the whole accumulating abundance of the coming celebration. The great house ate its way toward Christmas through weeks of preparation, and the kitchen was where the season first took hold, in the making of the puddings on Stir-Up Sunday, and the long rich baking of the weeks that followed. Let us stay in the kitchen a while longer, for the preparation of the Christmas foods went far beyond the puddings, and the weeks before, the day saw the kitchen turn to the whole great labor of the season's baking and preserving. There were the mince pies to prepare, or rather the mincemeat for them, the rich spiced mixture of dried fruit and sweet and spices, and often a little meat in the older recipes, that filled the small pies that were another emblem of the season. The mincemeat, like the puddings, was made ahead, mixed and stored to mature, ready to fill the pies that would be baked through the season. The mince pie a staple of the Christmas table and the Christmas hospitality, offered to callers, eaten through the 12 days, baked in quantity from the stored mincemeat. There were the great cakes, the rich Christmas cakes, dark and dense with fruit, made ahead and stored, iced perhaps as the day approached, the cake that was another center of the season's eating. There were the breads and the biscuits, and the whole range of the season's baking, the kitchen turning out the rich foods of Christmas in quantity through the weeks before, the larder filling with the stored abundance, the puddings and the cakes, and the mincemeat and the preserves, the whole accumulating richness of the season's food. And then there was the sheer quantity of it, for a great house at Christmas fed a great company over a long season, and the amount of food to be prepared was enormous, the kitchen laboring for weeks to lay in the stores for the feasting to come. The provisions were bought in and made up in great quantity, the larder stocked, the whole apparatus of the season's feeding prepared, the kitchen working steadily through the weeks before toward the great abundance of the Christmas table. The making of a great house's Christmas was, in large part, this long labor of the kitchen, the weeks of preparation. the puddings and the cakes and the mincemeat, and the whole rich store of the season's food prepared ahead and laid by. The abundance of the feast built up, dish by dish and store by store, through the long weeks of preparation before the season came, and through all of it the cook presided, the mistress of the kitchen, on whom the whole great labor of the Christmas food depended, planning and directing and executing the enormous task of feeding the great house through the season. Her skill and her labor were the foundation of the whole feast, the puddings and the pies and the cakes, the great dinner itself, all of it rising from her kitchen. And the Christmas of the family was, in the most fundamental way, built on the labor of the cook and her staff, the food that was the heart of the feast, made by the hands that labored, through the long weeks and the great day, in the hot kitchen below. While the kitchen made its puddings and cakes, the outdoor staff of the estate were preparing their own contribution to the Christmas of the great house. For a country house at Christmas drew on its whole estate, and the gardeners and the gamekeepers and the outdoor men had their part in the making of the season. The gardeners had two great tasks. The first was the greenery, for the decking of the house at Christmas required great quantities of evergreen, the holly and the ivy, and the fir and the bay, and the mistletoe that would dress the rooms. And all of it came from the estate, cut and gathered and brought in by the gardeners and their men. The holly with its berries, the ivy in its trailing lengths, the fir and the pine, the mistletoe cut from the old apple trees in the orchard. All of it gathered from the grounds and the woods of the estate, and brought to the house in great quantities for the decorating. And the second task was the fruit, for a great house prided itself on providing, even in the dead of winter, the fresh fruit that the season could not naturally give. And this was the work of the gardeners in the hothouses, in the glass houses of a great estate, heated through the winter. The gardeners grew the luxuries that would grace the Christmas table, the grapes and the peaches, and greatest of all, the pineapple, that emblem of horticultural triumph, grown in the heated houses against all the odds of the English winter. To set fresh grapes and a pineapple on the table in December was to display the prowess of the garden staff and the resources of the estate. And the gardeners labored through the winter to produce these out-of-season marvels for the Christmas feast. The gamekeepers, meanwhile, provided the game, for the estate was a source of meat as well as fruit and greenery, and the Christmas table would be supplied with the birds and the beasts of the estate, the pheasants and the partridges, the hares, the venison from the park, all taken by the gamekeepers and brought to the kitchen for the feast. And the whole apparatus of the estate turned, in the weeks before Christmas, toward the supplying of the great house's celebration. The gardeners with their greenery and their hothouse fruit, the gamekeepers with their game, the whole productive machinery of the country estate feeding the Christmas of the family at its heart. This is worth pausing on, for it is a particular feature of the country house Christmas, this drawing on the whole estate, and it distinguishes it from the Christmas of a townhouse or a lesser home. The great country house did not simply buy its Christmas. It grew it and raised it and gathered it from its own land through the labor of its own people, the greenery from its woods, the fruit from its glass houses, the game from its park, the whole feast in large part a product of the estate itself, and the family at the center of it enjoyed a Christmas supplied by the land they owned and the people they employed, the abundance of the season rising from the estate around them, gathered and grown and brought in by the many hands that worked the land and served the house. There was extra work in readying the house itself, for a great house at Christmas filled with guests, and the preparing of it to receive them was a great labor that fell on the indoor servants in the weeks and days before the season. For Christmas, in a country house, was a house party, a gathering, and the family did not keep it alone, but filled the house with relations and friends who came to stay for the season, sometimes for the whole of the 12 days. The married children came home with their own children. The relations gathered from near and far. Friends were invited for the festivities, and so the great house, which might be quiet enough through much of the year, filled at Christmas with a crowd of guests, and the preparing for them was considerable. The guest rooms had to be readied, aired and cleaned and warmed, the beds made up, the fires laid, everything prepared for the comfort of the arriving guests. The whole house had to be cleaned and polished to its highest pitch, for Christmas was the great occasion of the year, and the house must shine. The extra provisions had to be laid in, the house stocked for the feeding of a great company over many days. And the servants, already busy with the ordinary running of the house, took on the great additional burden of preparing for and then serving a house full of guests over the whole long season, their work multiplying as the family's celebration grew. For this is the thing to hold on to, all through the warm scenes we are about to enter, that the Christmas of the family was the labor of the servants, and never more so than at Christmas, the season that was rest and festivity and joy for the family above, was the hardest work of the year for the servants below. For everything that made the family's Christmas, the clean, warm house, the decorated rooms, the great meals, the comfort of the guests, was made by the servants, and the more the family celebrated, the harder the servants worked. The Christmas of the great house was a joy built on labor, as everything in that world was built on labor, and the joy was the family's, and the labor was the servants', and the two went on together through the whole bright season, the celebration above and the work below. But let us not run ahead to the strain of it, for there was warmth in it too, even for the servants, as we shall see. For now, the house is being readied, cleaned and polished and prepared, the guest rooms aired, the provisions laid in, the whole great house made ready to receive the family and its guests for the season. And as the day drew near, the guests began to arrive, coming in from the cold winter roads to the warm, bright house, and the great house filled with the gathering family, and the Christmas of the household truly began. Let us dwell a moment on the arrival of the guests, for the coming of the family, and the friends to the great house for Christmas, was one of the pleasures of the season, and it had its own particular character in the depth of winter. They came in from the cold, the guests traveling through the winter country to the great house by train to the nearest station, and then by the carriage sent to meet them, or by their own carriages through the cold roads, the winter journey to the Christmas gathering. and they arrived at the great house in the short winter afternoon or the early dark, coming in from the cold and the journey to the warmth and the light of the house, welcomed in, their wraps taken, brought to the fire, the travellers arrived at last at the warm haven of the Christmas house. And the arriving filled the house, for a great house party gathered a considerable company, the married sons and daughters with their own families, the brothers and sisters, the cousins, the friends invited for the season, the whole gathering of the family and its circle, arriving over the days before Christmas, the house filling with the company. The children arrived with their parents, the cousins meeting, the whole younger generation gathered. The grandparents were there, the old people at the head of the family. The whole family, spread through the year across its various homes, gathered now for the season under the one roof of the great house, the family assembled for Christmas. There was a particular warmth in this gathering, the coming together of the scattered family, for families were spread. Then, as now, across distances, the grown children in their own homes, the relations in their various places, and Christmas was the great season of gathering, the time when the scattered family came together, when the whole clan assembled under one roof for the festival. The pleasure of the reunion, the family come together, the generations gathered, the old and the young under one roof, was one of the deep warmths of the season, and the arriving of the guests, the filling of the house with the gathered family, was the beginning of it. And the great house was made for this, for the gathering of a great company, with its many bedrooms for the guests, its great rooms for the assembled family, its whole capacity to hold and feed and warm a large company over the long season. The house that might be quiet through much of the year came into its own at Christmas, filled with the gathered family, the many rooms occupied, the great table extended, the whole house alive with the company of the season. This was what the great house was for, in part, the holding of such gatherings. And Christmas was its great gathering, the house filled and alive with the assembled family, warm and bright and full against the winter. The whole company gathered for the season under the one great roof. Now the greenery that the gardeners had gathered was brought into the house, and the decking of the rooms began. And this was one of the great pleasures of the season, the transformation of the house with the evergreen. And it was done traditionally, not too early, for there were old beliefs about the timing of it. But in the days just before Christmas, the decking of a house with evergreen at midwinter was old, far older than the Victorian Christmas, older than Christmas itself, reaching back into the ancient customs of bringing green life into the house in the dead season of the year. The holly and the ivy and the mistletoe that stayed green when all else was bare, tokens of enduring life in the dark of winter. And the Victorians took up this old custom and made it their own, decking their rooms with great quantities of evergreen, the holly with its bright berries wreathed along the mantels and the picture frames, the ivy trailing garlands of greenery hung about the rooms, the whole house dressed in green and red for the season. And there was the mistletoe, hung in its particular places, for the mistletoe carried its own custom, the license to kiss beneath it, a small permitted liberty of the season. The mistletoe bough hung in the hall or the doorway under which a kiss might be claimed. It was one of the small, warm licenses of Christmas, the mistletoe, a relaxing of the ordinary, strict decorum, a bit of permitted play, and it hung in its place through the season, the occasion of much small merriment. The decorating was, in part, the work of the servants, who did the heavy work of putting up the greenery, the reaching and the fixing and the arranging. But it was also, in part, a pleasure the family took a hand in, particularly the younger members and the children, for the decking of the house was one of the enjoyable rituals of the season. The making of the wreaths and the garlands, the arranging of the greenery, the transformation of the familiar rooms into the green bowered spaces of Christmas. The family and the servants both had their part in it, and the house was decked, room by room, in the days before Christmas, until the whole of it, or all the parts the family used, was dressed in evergreen for the season, green and fragrant and festive, the bare winter shut outside, and the green life of Christmas brought within. And there was a hierarchy in the decorating as in everything, for the family's rooms were decked richly, elaborately, with the finest greenery and the most careful arrangement, while the servants' spaces below were decked, if at all more simply, with what greenery could be spared, and the homemade paper chains that the servants made for themselves. The contrast was marked, the elaborate decoration of the family's rooms and the simpler dressing of the servants' hall. The same green season kept richly above and modestly below, the decking of the house following, like everything else, the divisions of the household. But green it all was, above and below, the whole house touched with the evergreen of the season, and the bringing in of it was one of the first and best of the pleasures of the Christmas of the great house. And then there was the tree, the Christmas tree, the great new custom of the age, the evergreen fir set up and hung with candles and ornaments and gifts. And its coming to England is one of the best known stories of the Victorian Christmas, and worth the telling. The Christmas tree came from Germany, where the decorating of an evergreen tree at Christmas was an old tradition, long before it came to England. And it came to England, in its fashionable form, with the royal family, and above all, with Prince Albert, the Queen's husband, who was German, and who brought the custom of his homeland to the English court. There had been Christmas trees in England before Albert, brought by earlier German royalty and by German families settled in England. But it was Albert who made the tree fashionable, who set it up at Windsor for his family. And above all, it was a single image that fixed the custom in the national imagination. For in the year 1848, an illustrated newspaper printed a picture of the royal family gathered around their Christmas tree at Windsor, the Queen and the Prince and their children about the decorated tree, and the picture was seen throughout the land, and it did more than anything to spread the custom. If the Queen and the Prince kept a Christmas tree, then the fashionable families would keep one too, and then those below them, and the custom spread through the homes of the land, down from the court through the classes, until the Christmas tree became, within a generation, a fixture of the English Christmas, as it has remained ever since. And the tree in a great house was a splendid thing, a fine tall fir, brought in from the estate, set up in a place of honor, and decorated with all the art the household could bring to it. There were candles, small candles fixed to the branches, lit on Christmas Eve to make the tree blaze with light. A beautiful and a dangerous thing, the lit tree, watched carefully lest it catch. There were ornaments, the glass baubles that were beginning to be made, and the older decorations, the gilded nuts and the sweets and the fruit, and the small handmade ornaments, the paper flowers and the cut paper decorations. And there were the gifts, for the tree was often where the presents were displayed or hung. The small gifts tied to the branches or arranged beneath, so that the tree was the center of the giving, as well as the decorating. The lighting of the tree was one of the great moments of the Christmas of the great house, done on Christmas Eve. The candles lit, the tree suddenly ablaze with its many small flames. The children brought in to see it in its glory, the gifts revealed. It was a moment of wonder, particularly for the children. The great lit tree in the darkened room, glowing with its candles, hung with its ornaments and its gifts, the very emblem of the new Christmas, the magical center of the season brought from Germany, made fashionable by the royal family, and now blazing in the great houses and the humble homes of England alike. The Christmas tree in its candlelit glory. There was a real danger in the lit tree, which we should not pass over, for the candles were real flames, fixed to a drying evergreen in a room full of people, and the fire risk was serious and real. The candles were lit only for a while and watched carefully, and there was often water or sand kept near in case of fire, and the lighting of the tree was a supervised and careful thing precisely because of the danger. Fires from Christmas trees were not unknown, and the beauty of the lit tree carried its hazard, the many small flames on the dry branches, and the household watched it carefully while it burned, and put it out before it could catch. But the beauty was worth the care, the tree in its blaze of candlelight, and the careful, supervised lighting of it was part of the ritual. The tree lit for its glorious while, and then the candles snuffed, the wonder enjoyed, and the danger managed. The lit tree, the magical center of the season, for the careful while it burned. Christmas Eve then, the night before the day, and in a Victorian household, this was an evening of its own particular character, warm and expectant, the eve of the great festival, and it had its own customs and its own pleasures distinct from the day that followed. The tree was lit, as we have seen, on Christmas Eve in many households. The candles kindled, and the tree revealed in its glory. And Christmas Eve was, for many Victorian families, the time of the giving of gifts, before the shift that later made Christmas morning the great time of presents. The family gathered, the tree ablaze, and the gifts were given and received, the small parcels opened, the pleasure of the giving and the getting, the children in their delight. The gifts of a Victorian Christmas were modest by our standards, even in a wealthy house, for the great commercial Christmas of mountains of presents was not yet come. There were gifts, but fewer and simpler, books and small ornaments, and useful things, and for the children, toys and sweets and oranges and nuts, the small treasures of the season. And there were the carols, for the singing of carols was one of the great pleasures of Christmas Eve, and the great house might be visited by carol singers from the village or the estate, coming to the house to sing in the cold outside the door, or admitted to sing in the hall. The old songs of the season sung in the winter night, and rewarded with food and drink and coins. Or the family sang its own carols, gathered around the piano in the drawing room, the whole company joining in the songs of Christmas. The old familiar tunes filling the warm, bright room, while the winter night pressed dark against the windows. And there was, in many households, a stranger custom of Christmas Eve, one that has largely faded from our own keeping of the season, but was strong among the Victorians. And that was the telling of ghost stories. For Christmas, to the Victorians, was a time for ghost stories, for tales of the supernatural told around the fire on the long, dark nights of the season. And Christmas Eve, above all, was a night for such tales. It seems strange to us, who have made Christmas a thing of pure warmth and light. But to the Victorians, the warmth and light were the sweeter for the dark, and the fear pressed against them. And the ghost story by the Christmas fire, the tale of haunting and dread told in the warm circle of firelight, while the winter dark waited outside, was one of the pleasures of the season. It is no accident that the most famous of all Christmas stories, Dickens's Tale of Scrooge, is a ghost story, for the Christmas ghost story was a Victorian tradition, and Christmas Eve by the fire was its time. So Christmas Eve passed, in the warm decked house, the tree ablaze, the gifts given, the carols sung, the ghost stories told by the fire, the whole family gathered in the warmth against the winter dark on the eve of the great day. And at last the children were taken up to bed, to hang their stockings by the fire, or at the foot of the bed, in the hope of what the morning would bring. And the house settled toward sleep on the night before Christmas. The tree dark now, the fires burning low, the great day waiting to dawn. And below, the servants worked on, for the greatest day of their year's labor was the morrow. And much remained to prepare before they too could seek their beds in the last hours of Christmas Eve. There were the drinks of the season too, for Christmas had its particular drinks, as it had its particular foods, and the warm, spiced drinks of Christmas were part of the whole warmth of the season against the cold. There was the wassail, the old spiced drink of the season, whose name came from an old greeting, meaning good health, and which had a long history reaching back through the centuries. The wassail bowl was a great bowl of hot spiced ale, or wine, or cider, sweetened and spiced, and sometimes with roasted apples floating in it, passed around the company, shared from the common bowl, the old communal drink of the midwinter season. And there was the custom of wassailing, the going about with the wassail bowl, the singing from house to house, or the singing in the orchards, the old rural custom of the season. The wassail carried round, the health drunk, the good cheer shared. There was the mulled wine, the wine heated and spiced, the warm red wine with its spices and its sugar, the drink of the winter season, warming against the cold, its spiced fragrance part of the smell of Christmas. There was the punch, the great bowls of punch mixed for the festivities, hot and strong and spiced. There was the negus and the other warm drinks of the age, the whole warm spiced repertoire of the winter season, the drinks that warmed the body and cheered the company through the cold festivities of Christmas. And the drinking was generous at Christmas, more generous than at other seasons, for Christmas was a time of indulgence, of the relaxing of the ordinary restraints, and the wine flowed, and the punch was mixed, and the company was merry. The great house, kept a generous table at Christmas, in drink as in food, the fine wines brought up from the cellar, the punch and the mulled wine and the wassail, the whole warm abundance of the season's drinking, part of the general abundance and indulgence of the feast. And below stairs, too, there was the drinking, for the servants had their share of the season's cheer, their beer and their punch, their own drinking at their own Christmas, the ale flowing in the servants' hall as the wine flowed above. The whole house, above and below, kept the season in drink as in food. The warm, spiced drinks of Christmas passing through the great house, from the family's fine wines to the servants' ale, the whole household warmed by the drinking of the season. The good cheer of the Christmas cup shared in its different measures through the whole of the house, and so to Christmas morning, the great day itself. And it began in the household with the things that belonged to the morning, the stockings and the church and the gathering of the family, before the great business of the dinner that would crown the day. The children woke first, of course, to their stockings, for the custom of the Christmas stocking was well established. The stocking hung the night before, and filled in the night with small gifts and treats, the orange in the toe, the sweets and the nuts, the small toys and trinkets, discovered by the children in the excitement of the Christmas dawn. It was a children's pleasure, the stocking, the first joy of the Christmas morning, and the children of the great house woke to it as children do, in the early dark of the winter morning, to the treasures the night had brought. And then there was church, for Christmas was a Christian festival, and its religious observance was real, and the family went to church on Christmas morning, to the parish church, to keep the feast of the Nativity with the service and the carols and the sermon. The whole household went, or much of it, the family, and such of the servants as could be spared, out into the cold Christmas morning, to the church decked in its own greenery, to keep the religious heart of the festival, the celebration of the birth that the whole season marked. And the walk, or the drive to church on Christmas morning, through the cold, perhaps through snow, the bells ringing out across the winter country, was one of the fixed images of the season. The household going to church on Christmas Day, the religious observance mattered, and it is worth remembering, for we have made Christmas so much a thing of food and gifts and family that we can forget it was, and to the Victorians very much was, a religious festival, the keeping of a holy day, the celebration of the Nativity. The family that gathered for its great dinner had been to church that morning, had kept the religious feast, and the warmth and the abundance of the day were set within the frame of the religious observance. The holy day kept in church before the family feast that followed. The two went together, the sacred and the celebratory, the church in the morning and the dinner after, the whole day both a holy feast and a family festival. And after church, the family gathered, the whole company assembled in the great house, the resident family and the guests who had come to stay, the children and the grandparents, the whole gathering of the family for Christmas, come together in the decked and festive house for the great day. There might be the giving of more gifts for those households that gave on the day. There was the warmth of the gathered family, the particular pleasure of the whole family assembled that Christmas above all occasions brought, And there was the building anticipation of the great event of the day, the Christmas dinner, toward which the whole day, and indeed the whole season of preparation, had been building. The great feast that was the centre and climax of the Victorian Christmas, now being prepared in its final furious stage in the kitchens below. And now the great Christmas dinner, the centre and climax of the whole season, the feast toward which all the weeks of preparation had been building. And it was a meal of such abundance and such ceremony that it deserves to be taken slowly, dish by dish, for it was the heart of the Victorian Christmas. The Christmas dinner of a great house was an enormous meal of many courses, the richest and most abundant meal of the whole year. It was served in the dining room, decked with its greenery, the table laid with the best of everything, the finest linen and the silver and the glass and the seasonal decorations, the oranges studded with cloves, the whole festive setting of the Christmas table, the family and the guests gathered, the great company seated at the long table, and the feast began, course after course of it, the abundance of the season laid before them. There was the soup to begin, and the fish, in the manner of a formal dinner, and then the great meats. And here the Christmas table showed its particular character, for the centre of the Christmas feast was the festive bird, and in a great house there might be several. There was the turkey, the great bird that was becoming ever more the emblem of the English Christmas, roasted and brought to the table in its glory. There was the goose, the older Christmas bird, rich and dark. There might be a great joint of beef, the roast beef of old England, or the venison from the park, or the boar's head in the grandest and most traditional houses, carried in with ceremony, an echo of the medieval feast. The Christmas table groaned with meat, the festive birds and the great joints, the abundance of the estate and the season heaped upon it, and with the meats came the accompaniments, the stuffings of chestnut and forcemeat, the sauces, the vegetables, and here again the great house displayed its resources, for alongside the ordinary winter vegetables, the potatoes and the sprouts and the root vegetables, there might be the out-of-season marvels from the hothouses, the asparagus and the fine vegetables grown against the season in the heated glass houses, set upon the table to display the prowess of the garden staff and the wealth of the estate. To eat asparagus at Christmas was to eat the impossible, the summer vegetable produced in the dead of winter, and its presence on the table was a quiet boast of the estate's resources. The abundance was the point, and it was a real and deliberate display, for the Christmas feast was, among its other meanings, a display of plenty, of the wealth and resources of the family, the table heaped with more than any company could eat, the festive birds and the great joints, and the out-of-season luxuries, the whole groaning abundance of it, a statement of the family's prosperity and the estate's bounty. The Christmas dinner was the great feast of the year, and it was meant to be, abundant beyond need, rich beyond measure, the whole resources of the house and the estate poured out upon the table in the great celebration of the season. And then, after the meats, came the moment that was the very climax of the Christmas dinner, the bringing in of the plum pudding, and this was a piece of theatre as much as a course of the meal, and it was the great set piece of the whole feast, the plum pudding, the great rich dark pudding that had been made weeks before on stir-up Sunday and had matured the larder ever since, was boiled again on the day for hours until it was hot through, and then it was turned out, dark and round and glistening, and it was brought to the table in a particular and dramatic way. For the pudding was doused in brandy, and the brandy was set alight, and the pudding was carried into the dining room aflame, wreathed in the blue flames of the burning brandy, a sprig of holly set on its top, borne in through the darkened room like a thing of fire, to the delight and applause of the company. It was a wonderful piece of theatre, the flaming pudding, and it was the great moment of the Christmas dinner. The lights perhaps lowered, the pudding carried in blazing, the blue flames flickering over the dark round of it, the holly on its crown, set down before the company in its glory. And then the flames died, and the pudding was cut and served and eaten, rich and dark and heavy, spiced and fruited, the great sweet climax of the feast. And in the eating there was the further pleasure of the charms, the silver coins and tokens that had been stirred into the pudding weeks before, discovered now in the portions, the lucky finding the silver coin, or the ring, or the thimble, each with its meaning, the small fortunes of the pudding distributed among the company. The plum pudding was the emblem of the Christmas feast, the dish that more than any other stood for the whole celebration, and its bringing in a flame was the great moment of the dinner, the piece of Christmas theatre that everyone remembered, the flaming pudding borne through the room, and it was the fruit of the whole long preparation, made weeks before, matured through the season, the charms stirred in on stir-up Sunday, now found on the day, the pudding tying the climax of the feast back to the first preparations weeks before, the whole season of Christmas gathered into the one great flaming dish. And after the pudding came the further sweets, for the Christmas dinner did not end with the pudding, but went on to the mince pies, the small rich pies of spiced fruit that were another emblem of the season, and the cakes and the sweets, and then the dessert, the fruit and the nuts, and here again the hothouse fruit appeared, the grapes and the pineapple grown against the season, the crowning luxuries of the feast. Course after course, the great dinner went on, the abundance seemingly without end, the whole feast of the season laid out and consumed in the long, rich hours of the Christmas dinner, until at last the great meal drew to its close, the company replete, the feast accomplished, the center and climax of the whole Christmas season achieved and enjoyed. Let us go down now from the bright dining room to the kitchen below, because the great feast we have just enjoyed had a hidden other half, and it was the hardest day's labor of the year for the servants who made it, and it deserves to be seen. The Christmas dinner was, for the kitchen, the supreme test and the supreme labor of the year. The cook and her staff had been preparing for days, and on the day itself they labored from before dawn in a controlled frenzy for the producing of that enormous multi-course feast, all of it to be ready at the right moment, all of it hot and perfect, and in its sequence, from the confined and sweltering kitchen, was a feat of the most intense and exhausting kind. The great birds to be roasted, the joints, the many dishes, the sauces, the vegetables, the puddings reheated, the whole vast meal timed and coordinated and brought off on the one day of the year when everything must be at its finest and most abundant. The kitchen on Christmas Day was a place of heat and pressure and furious labor, the range roaring, the coppers steaming, the cook directing her staff in the great effort, the kitchen maids and the scullery maids working at full stretch, the whole below-stairs world bent to the single great task of producing the family's Christmas dinner. And it was the hottest and hardest work imaginable. In the heat of the kitchen, on the shortest, darkest day of the year, the servants laboring below in the sweat and the steam and the pressure, while the family gathered above in the decked and festive rooms. And when the feast was ready, it had to be served, carried up from the kitchen to the dining room, course after course, by the servants who waited at the great meal, the butler and the footman and the parlour maids, standing through the long dinner, serving the many courses, managing the whole elaborate service of the feast, on their feet through the hours of the family's celebration. The servants who made the Christmas dinner did not sit down to it. They made it and served it, and stood by while the family ate it. And only much later, when the family's feast was done and cleared, would the servants have their own Christmas, in the hours that remained. This is the shadow side of the bright Christmas feast, and it should not be forgotten in the warmth of the scene, that the great dinner was the hardest labor of the servants' year, that the family's greatest day of feasting was the servants' greatest day of work, that the abundance and the ease and the celebration above were bought, as everything was bought, with the labor below, and never more so than at Christmas. The flaming pudding borne so wonderfully into the dining room had been made and boiled and tended by servants in the hot kitchen. The groaning table had been supplied and cooked and served by the labor of the staff. The family's Christmas was the servants' hardest work, and the two went on together, the feast above and the labor below, on the great day of the year. After the great dinner came the afternoon and evening of Christmas Day, and this was a time of family gathering and of games and amusements, the whole company assembled in the warmth of the decked house, keeping the festival together in the ways the age loved. The Christmas afternoon and evening was a time for the parlour games that the Victorians delighted in, the games that gathered the whole company, young and old, into shared amusement. There were the guessing games and the word games, the charades that were so beloved, the whole company divided into teams to act out their words, while the others guessed. There were the games of forfeits, and the memory games, and the many parlour amusements that filled a Victorian evening. And there were the games particular to Christmas, and one above all that was the very emblem of the Victorian Christmas evening, and that was Snapdragon. Snapdragon was a game of a peculiarly Victorian sort, half game and half hazard, and it was played at Christmas. A wide bowl was filled with raisins, and brandy was poured over them, and the brandy was set alight, and the game was to snatch the raisins out of the burning brandy and eat them, the blue flames playing over the bowl, the players darting their hands into the fire to snatch the flaming fruit. It was, by any modern reckoning, an alarming thing to do. A game of snatching burning fruit from a bowl of fire, and it was played by children and adults alike. In the darkened room, the faces lit by the blue flames, the whole company gathered around the bowl of fire, snatching the raisins. It seems extraordinary to us, but it was a beloved Christmas game, snapdragon, the flames, and the daring, and the darkened room. One of the small, strange pleasures of the Victorian Christmas, and there were the Christmas crackers, that other Victorian invention, the paper-wrapped tube that pulled apart with a bang to reveal its small treasures. The cracker was invented by a London sweet maker named Tom Smith, who had seen in Paris the fashion for sweets wrapped in twists of paper, and who developed the idea, adding the small gift, the paper hat, the motto, or the joke, and above all, the bang, the strip of chemical that cracked as the cracker was pulled apart. And the cracker became a fixture of the Victorian Christmas, pulled at the table or in the games of the evening. The bang, the small gift tumbling out, the paper hat donned, the motto read, the whole small ceremony of the cracker that we keep still at our own Christmas tables. Another Victorian invention handed down to us. So the Christmas afternoon and evening passed, in games and crackers and the gathered warmth of the family. The whole company keeping the festival together. The children and the grandparents, the family and the guests, in the decked and candlelit rooms of the great house, the winter dark outside and the warmth of the celebration within. And the day drew on toward its close, the greatest day of the year, the feast accomplished, the family gathered, the games played, the whole warm abundance of Christmas Day enjoyed, until at last the company sought their beds, the great day done, and the house settled toward sleep on Christmas night, with the long tale of the season still to come. And then came the day after Christmas, the 26th of December, and this day had a particular character and a particular name, for it was Boxing Day, and it belonged, in a real sense, to the servants, and its story is one of the more interesting of the whole season. The name came from the Christmas box, the gift of money or goods given at Christmas to the servants and the tradespeople, and all those who had served the household through the year. It was an old custom, the giving of the Christmas box, and it fell on the day after Christmas, and it gave the day its name. The servants of the household received their boxes, their Christmas gifts from the family, and the tradespeople who called at the house through the year, the ones who delivered and served, came for their Christmas boxes too. The small gifts of money that rewarded a year's service. Boxing Day was the day of the giving of these boxes. The day the household's gratitude, such as it was expressed in the small gifts to those who served. And the gifts to the servants were a real and considered thing, discussed in the household manuals of the age, which advised mistresses on what was proper to give. The gifts were often practical, useful things, cloth for a dress, useful books, articles of clothing, the kind of improving or practical gift that the age thought suitable for a servant, given according to the servant's rank in the household, the senior servants receiving more than the junior. It was not lavish, and it was shaped by the whole condescending spirit of the age toward its servants, the practical improving gift given from above. But it was real, a genuine marking of the season, the family's Christmas gift to the servants who served them. And more than the gifts, Boxing Day gave the servants something rarer and more precious, which was a measure of their own Christmas. For on Boxing Day, the servants had their turn, having labored through Christmas Day to make the family's feast. The servants were given, on Boxing Day, their own celebration, their own Christmas dinner, and some time to themselves, and the chance for those whose families lived near enough to visit their own people. The family, on Boxing Day, made do with a simpler meal, a cold spread or a high tea, precisely so that the servants might be released from the labor of a great dinner and have their own Christmas instead. It was the one day when the household order relaxed a little, when the servants had their feast and their gifts and their measure of freedom. The servants' Christmas kept on the day after the families. Something both generous and telling runs through this arrangement. The servants' Christmas kept the day after the families, on the day the family ate cold, so the servants might feast. It was a real kindness in its way, the giving of the day and the feast and the gifts to the servants. And it was also entirely within the order of things. The servants' celebration fitted in after the families, on the families' terms, by the families' leave, the servants' Christmas, a thing granted from above, once the family's greater Christmas was done. Both were true, the genuine warmth of it and the unchanged hierarchy of it, and Boxing Day held both. The servants' own Christmas kept the day after the families, in the great house at midwinter. There was one more great event of the servants' Christmas, and it was the most remarkable of all, for on one night of the season, the ordinary order of the great house was, for a few hours, turned upside down. And that was the night of the servants' ball. The servants' ball was a custom of the great houses, held at some point in the Christmas season, often toward the end of it, at which the servants of the household held a ball, a dance, with food and drink and music in the great house itself, and at which, most remarkably, the family joined them. The family came down, and the servants and the family danced together. The master might dance with the housekeeper, the mistress with the butler, the young gentleman of the family with the maids. The ordinary iron divisions of the household relaxed for the one night of the ball. This was an old idea. In its roots, the turning of the tables at midwinter, the ancient custom of misrule, by which, at the great festival, the low were raised and the high brought down. The servant became the master for a night, the ordinary order inverted in the season of celebration. By the Victorian period, this had softened into the more decorous form of the servants' ball, no longer a real inversion, but a gracious condescension, the family joining the servants' celebration, dancing with them for a night, marking the season with this one relaxation of the ordinary distance. But the old route was there, the midwinter turning of the tables, the one night when the household order bent. And it was, by the accounts that survive, a real pleasure, the servants' ball, genuinely enjoyed on both sides. For the servants it was their great celebration, the ball in the great house, the food and the drink and the dancing, the night when they were, for once, the celebrants rather than the servers, and when the family honored them by joining them. For the family, it was a pleasure too, and a duty pleasurably done, the marking of their bond with their servants, the gracious relaxation of the ordinary distance, the dancing with the people who served them. The servants' ball was one of the warmest customs of the country house Christmas. The whole household gathered in celebration, the family and the servants together. The ordinary divisions softened for the night of the ball. And yet, even here, the order was never wholly gone, for the servants danced with the family according to their rank, the senior servants first, the whole thing conducted within a form that acknowledged the hierarchy even as it relaxed it. And in the morning, the ordinary order returned, the servants back to their labor, the family back to their leisure, the one night of the ball over. It was a relaxation of the order, not an abolition of it, a gracious bending that acknowledged the hierarchy in the very act of softening it. But it was real for all that. The warmth of the servants' ball, the one night when the great house celebrated as a whole, family and servants together, in the depth of the Christmas season. And it was remembered on both sides as one of the good things of the year. And so the season ran on through the 12 days of Christmas, for the Christmas of the Victorians was not one day, but 12, the 12 days that ran from Christmas Day to the 5th of January, the whole stretch a season of festivity, and it ended at the last on the 12th night with the oldest and in some ways the strangest of all the Christmas customs. The 12 days of Christmas were a real thing, a season of continued festivity, the house party often lasting the whole of it, the guests staying, the celebration continuing. The decked house kept festive through the 12 days, and through those days the festivities continued, the games and the entertainments, the visits and the gatherings, the whole long social season of Christmas in the great house, the 12 days of feasting and pleasure that the old calendar allowed. It was a real holiday, a real season of rest and celebration, set into the depth of winter, the 12 days when ordinary business paused and the household gave itself to the festival. And the season ended on Twelfth Night, the 5th of January, or the 6th by some reckonings, the 12th night after Christmas, and this was traditionally the great climax and conclusion of the whole season, in some ways an even greater festivity than Christmas Day itself in the older tradition. Twelfth Night was the night of the greatest revelry, the last and wildest night of the season. And it had its own great custom, the 12th night cake, the great rich cake that was the center of the celebration. The 12th night cake was baked with a bean hidden in it, and sometimes a pea as well, and the cake was cut and shared among the company, and whoever found the bean in their slice was made the king of the night, the lord of misrule, the ruler of the 12th night revels, and whoever found the pea was the queen. And under this mock king and queen the revels were held, the games and the dancing and the feasting of 12th night, the whole company under the rule of the Bean King, the last great celebration of the season, the culmination of the 12 days of Christmas. Something very old lives in this, the Bean King of 12th night, the mock monarch of the revels, reaching back through the centuries to the old midwinter feasts and their lords of misrule, the ancient turning of the world upside down at the dead of the year, and it survived in the 12th night cake and its hidden bean into the Victorian Christmas, the last echo of the old wild midwinter revelry, kept on the last night of the season. Though even as the Victorians kept it, it was fading, the 12th night celebration giving way over the century to other things, its old importance declining, so that the family in our great house kept a 12th night that was already becoming more a quaint survival than the great festivity it had once been. But keep it they did, the cake and the bean, and the last revels on the 12th night, the end of the season. Let us step back now from the warm, bright house and remember, as we must, the other Christmas that was being kept, at the same season, a little way off, by people for whom the feast we have described would have seemed a dream from another world. For the Christmas of the poor was as different from the Christmas of the great house as the two ends of the age could make it. For most people in Victorian England were not wealthy, and a great many were poor, and their Christmas was a small and hard thing beside the abundance of the great house. The poor family kept Christmas as it could, which for many meant very little. A slightly better meal than usual if the money could be found. A small treat for the children, but nothing like the feast of the great house. The very poor kept scarcely any Christmas at all. For when there was barely enough for any day, there was nothing to spare for a feast, and Christmas passed in the cold and the hunger like any other day, only marked, perhaps, by the awareness of the plenty elsewhere that made the want the sharper. And there were those who kept Christmas in the hardest places of all, in the workhouse, where the destitute poor were kept, and in the prisons. And it is a mark of the age that even these places generally marked the day, that the workhouse and the prison generally stopped their labor on Christmas Day, and gave their inmates a Christmas meal, beef and plum pudding, provided often by the charity of benefactors, a small marking of the season, even in those grim places. It was little enough, the workhouse Christmas dinner, but it was something. The one day the harsh regime relaxed, and it speaks of the hold the season had, even on the hardest institutions of the age. And the contrast between the two Christmases, the feast of the great house and the want of the poor, was not lost on the Victorians themselves, for the season was bound up in their minds with charity, with the idea that Christmas was a time for the rich to remember the poor, for generosity and giving, and the relief of want. This was the great theme of the age's own Christmas writing, of Dickens above all, whose Christmas story was precisely about the conversion of a rich miser to charity and generosity, the recognition of the claims of the poor at Christmas. The season carried this idea, the duty of charity, the remembering of the poor amid the feasting, and the great houses kept it in their way, with their gifts to the estate and the village, their Christmas charity to the poor of the parish, the baskets of food and the gifts sent out from the great house to the cottages. But the charity, real as it was, did not close the gap, and the two Christmases remained, the feast and the want, side by side in the same land, the great house groaning with its abundance, and the poor family with its little, or its nothing, a few miles or a few streets apart. The charity of the season eased the contrast a little, and salved the conscience of the age a little, and did real good here and there. But the great house kept its great Christmas, and the poor kept their poor one, and the abundance of the one and the want of the other were two faces of the same age, the same season kept so differently by the two ends of a divided society. The warm, bright feast we have been enjoying, and the cold, hard Christmas of the poor, a little way beyond its lighted windows. Let us come back to the great house, though, and to the children, for Christmas was above all a children's festival, and the Christmas of the children of the great house was a particular and a magical thing, and worth dwelling on. The Victorian age had made Christmas, more than it had ever been before, a festival centered on children. And this was part of the whole reinvention of the season, the turning of Christmas into the warm, domestic family festival with the children at its heart. The gifts, the tree, the stockings, the whole apparatus of Christmas wonder was pitched in large part at the children, and the pleasure of the adults was in large part the pleasure of giving the children their Christmas, of watching the children's delight. And the children of the great house had a Christmas of real wonder. There was the tree, the great lit tree in its glory, revealed to the children in its blaze of candles, hung with its ornaments and its gifts, a thing of pure magic to a child. There were the stockings, filled in the night, discovered in the Christmas dawn. There were the gifts, the toys and the treats and the small treasures. There were the sweets and the oranges and the nuts, the special foods of the season. There were the games and the crackers and the whole warm, festive world of the decked house, and the gathering of the family, the grandparents and the cousins, the whole warm crowd of a family Christmas. To be a child in a great house at Christmas was to live for a season in a world of wonder and abundance and warmth, the magical Christmas of the age at its most enchanting. And yet even the children's Christmas had its particular shape in the great house, for the children of such a house lived, as we have seen, a life somewhat apart, in the nursery with the nurse, and their Christmas was lived in part in that nursery world. The children were brought down for the great moments, the tree, the dinner perhaps in part, the gathering of the family, and taken back up to the nursery for much of the rest. Their Christmas, a mix of the great family occasions, and the nursery world, with its own smaller Christmas. The nurse and the nursery maids, keeping the season with the children in their high rooms. It was a wonderful Christmas, the children's Christmas of the great house, but it was lived, like all their lives, partly apart, in the nursery world above, brought down for the wonder, and returned to the nursery after. There is a particular magic, though, that shines through the accounts of these childhood Christmases, remembered by the children grown old, the wonder of the lit tree, the excitement of the stockings, the warmth of the gathered family, the whole enchantment of the season as a child knew it. Whatever the divisions and the distances of the great house, the children's Christmas was, for the children, a time of real and remembered joy, the magical heart of the year, the season of wonder that they would carry in memory all their lives. And the making of that wonder for the children was one of the real and genuine warmths of the whole season. The adults' pleasure in the children's delight, the family gathered around the lit tree, watching the children's faces, the true and human warmth at the heart of the Victorian Christmas. There was another new custom of the Victorian Christmas that we have not yet dwelt on, and it was one that connected the household to the wider world of its friends and family across the whole country, and that was the Christmas card. The Christmas card was, like so much of the Victorian Christmas, a new invention of the age. The first Christmas card was made in the 1840s, a printed card with a festive scene and a greeting to be sent to friends and family at the season. And the custom grew, slowly at first, and then enormously as the century went on. The coming of the cheap post had made it possible. The penny post that allowed a card to be sent across the country for a penny, and the Christmas card rode on the post into every home in the land, until by the later decades of the century they were being sent in their millions. The exchange of Christmas cards became a fixed custom of the season, and the great house both sent and received them in quantity. For a family of wide connections had a wide correspondence, and the Christmas card was a way of maintaining that whole web of connection at the season. The cards sent out to the friends and relations near and far. The cards received in return, displayed about the rooms as they arrived, ranged on the mantelpiece and the tables. The accumulating cards themselves becoming part of the decoration of the Christmas house. The sending and receiving of cards was a real labor of the season. The whole wide acquaintance of the family remembered and greeted, the cards written and sent, the connections maintained across the distances of the country at the warm season of the year. The cards themselves were a small art of the age, printed with their festive scenes, and the scenes were various, and some of them strange to our eyes, for the Victorian Christmas card was not always the cosy snow and robins we might expect, but ranged into the odd and the whimsical, and sometimes the frankly bizarre, the strange humour of the age finding its way onto the cards. But many were the warm, festive scenes we would know, the snow and the holly, the coaching scenes, the robins, the whole iconography of the Christmas that the age was making, printed on the cards and sent across the land, spreading the images of the new Christmas as they spread its greetings. And the card was, at its heart, a small act of connection, a remembering, a reaching out across distance to friends and family at the season. And this was much of what Christmas was, the drawing together of the scattered connections of a life, the family gathered in the house, and the wider circle greeted by the cards. The whole web of a family's relationships warmed and maintained at the turning of the year. The Christmas card carried that warmth across the miles, from the great house to its far connections. A small printed token of remembrance sent out into the winter country, and returned, the cards crossing the land in their millions, connecting the homes of England in the shared observance of the season. Let us stand a while in the great house at the height of the season, and simply take in its atmosphere, the sensory world of a Victorian Christmas, for it was a feast of the senses as much as anything, and the atmosphere of it is much of what we still reach for when we reach for Christmas. Begin with the sight of it, the decked and candlelit house, the greenery everywhere, the holly and the ivy and the fir, the red berries against the dark green leaves, the garlands and the wreaths, the whole house dressed in evergreen, the tree in its glory, blazing with candles, hung with its bright ornaments, the candles and the lamps and the firelight, the warm golden light of the season filling the rooms, the house glowing against the winter dark, the rich colours of the season, the green and the red and the gold, the festive abundance of the decorated rooms. It was a feast for the eyes, the Christmas house, warm and bright and rich against the bare, cold world outside, and the smells of it, the particular smells of Christmas that we know still. The evergreen, the resinous scent of the fir and the pine, the green smell of the holly and the ivy filling the rooms, the cooking, the rich smells rising from the kitchen, the roasting meats, the spices of the puddings and the pies, the whole warm abundance of the Christmas kitchen scenting the house, the oranges and the cloves, the spiced fruit, the wine and the punch, the wood smoke and the coal smoke of the many fires, the warm smell of the heated house, the smells of Christmas, rich and warm and particular, the scent of the season filling the great house, and the sounds of it, the carols and the music, the songs of the season sung around the piano, the carol singers at the door, the sounds of the gathered family, the talk and the laughter, the games and the merriment, the children's voices, the whole warm noise of a house full of family and celebration, the crackle of the many fires, the church bells across the winter country, the sounds of Christmas, warm and human and festive, filling the great house at the season. And over it all, the particular warmth of the thing, the physical warmth of the well-fired house against the cold outside, and the other warmth, the warmth of the gathered family, the festivity, the abundance, the whole warm heart of Christmas set against the cold and the dark of the deep midwinter. For this was the essence of it, the Christmas of the Victorians, the warmth and the light and the abundance gathered against the dark and the cold, the festival of warmth at the dead of the year, the family drawn together in the bright decked house while the winter held the world outside. That contrast was the heart of it, the warmth within and the cold without. And it is the heart of Christmas still, the reason the season holds us, the light and the warmth and the gathering kindled against the longest nights of the year. And over it all lay the particular quality of the winter light of the season, the short days and the long nights that framed the whole festival. The sun, low and pale when it shone at all, setting in the middle of the afternoon, the long darkness of the winter evening in which the candle-lit house glowed all the warmer. The Christmas of the great house was lived largely in this winter dark. The short days, meaning that much of the festival happened by candlelight and firelight. The long evenings of the season, filled with the warm artificial light against the early dark. And this was part of its character, the festival of light kindled in the season of least light, the candles and the fires and the lit tree glowing against the long darkness of the midwinter nights, the warmth and the brightness, the more precious for the dark that framed them. The whole season, a kindling of light and warmth at the very bottom of the year, when the light was least and the dark was longest, and the warmth of the gathered family in the glowing house shone out against the deep cold night of midwinter. The Christmas of a great house reached out beyond the house itself, to the whole estate and the village around it, for the great house was the center of a whole community. And its Christmas was, in part, the Christmas of that community, and the keeping of it involved the family's relations with all the people of the estate. For a great country house stood at the head of a whole rural world, the estate with its tenants and its laborers, the village with its people, the whole community that lived on and around the land the family owned. And the Christmas of the great house extended by custom to this community, the family marking the season with its dependents, the tenants and the laborers and the village poor. There were the gifts to the estate, the Christmas cheer sent out from the great house, the beef and the food and the coal distributed to the cottages, the marking of the season in the family's relations with its people. There might be a great gathering, in some houses, a Christmas entertainment for the tenants or the estate children, a party or a feast given by the family for its dependents, the great house opening at the season, to the wider community that it stood at the head of. The tenants might be entertained, the estate children given a treat and a gift, the whole rural community brought for a Christmas occasion into relation with the great house at its center. It was the season when the bonds between the family and its people were marked and renewed, the great house acknowledging, in its Christmas giving and entertaining, its place at the head of the whole community and its obligations to it. This was part of the old idea of the great house and its place in the rural order, the family at the head of the community, bound to its people by ties of obligation and dependence, the lord of the estate responsible, in the old paternalist idea, for the welfare of his people. And Christmas was the great season for the marking of these bonds, the family's Christmas charity and hospitality to its estate, the expression of its place at the head of the rural world. It was hierarchy, and it was paternalism, the giving from above to the dependent below, entirely within the order of the age. But it was also, in its way, a real community, a real set of bonds and obligations, the great house and its estate, a whole world bound together. And Christmas, the season when those bonds were most warmly marked and renewed. And so the Christmas of the great house was not only the family's, but reached out to the whole community around it, the estate and the village and the poor, the gifts and the entertainments, and the charity flowing out from the great house at the season, marking its place at the head of the rural world and its bonds with the people who lived on its land and served it. The season drew the whole community into its observance, from the family at the center to the poorest laborer on the estate. The Christmas of the great house, the Christmas, in some measure, of the whole world that depended on it. Let us think for a moment about the giving of gifts, for the gift was at the heart of the Victorian Christmas as it is at the heart of ours. And yet the Victorian giving was a different thing from our own, and the difference is worth understanding. The gifts of a Victorian Christmas were, by our standards, modest, even in a wealthy house. The great commercial Christmas of our own age, the mountains of presents, the months of shopping, the whole vast machinery of Christmas buying, was not yet come, or was only in its beginnings. The Victorian gift was smaller, simpler, fewer. A book, an ornament, a piece of jewelry for a grown person, a toy or a game, or a doll for a child, the sweets and the oranges and the nuts that were the small treats of the season. The giving was real and warm, but it was modest, a few gifts rather than a heap, chosen with care, given with affection, and many of the gifts were made rather than bought, for the age valued the handmade gift, the thing worked by the giver's own hands, and much of the giving, particularly among the women and the children, was of handmade things, the embroidery and the needlework, the handmade ornaments and trinkets, the painted or worked or sewn gifts that the giver had made. The children made gifts for their parents, the painted cards and the worked samplers and the small handmade tokens. The women worked their embroideries and their fancy work as gifts. The handmade gift, worked with care over the weeks before the season, was a real and valued part of the Victorian giving, the labour and the love of the maker in the gift. Something is worth holding on to in this, the modesty of the Victorian giving, for it stands in such contrast to our own Christmas, which has grown so vast in its buying, so heaped in its gifts, so commercial in its whole spirit. The Victorians, who made so much of our Christmas, did not make this, the great commercial gift-giving Christmas, which grew later in the century after. Their giving was smaller and simpler and more personal. The few gifts, the handmade things, the modest treats, and the warmth of it was in the care and the affection rather than the abundance. It was a gentler giving than ours, and there is something in it worth remembering. The modest gift given with care, the handmade token, the small treasures of a simpler Christmas. And yet the commercial Christmas was beginning even then, for the age that invented the Christmas card and the cracker and made the tree fashionable was also the age that began the commercial machinery of the season. The shops decking themselves for Christmas, the goods made and sold for the giving, the beginnings of the great Christmas trade. The family in our great house stood at the beginning of that. The modest, older, giving still largely holding, but the commercial season beginning to stir. The Christmas of care and the handmade gift beginning its long, slow turn toward the Christmas of the shops and the heaped presents that we know. But in the 1880s, it was still, largely, the gentler thing, the modest gift given with care, and that was the Christmas giving of the great house, warm and personal and modest at the heart of the season. There was, in the midst of the 12 days, another turning of the year, for the new year fell within the Christmas season, on the 1st of January, and it had its own observances, its own customs, woven into the longer festival of Christmas. The new year was marked, though in England it was, for most, the lesser festival beside Christmas, the quieter turning within the greater celebration. There was the seeing out of the old year, and the bringing in of the new, the gathering to mark the passing of midnight, the old year gone and the new begun. There were the customs of the turning, the resolutions for the year ahead, the looking back and the looking forward that the turning of the year brings. And in the north, and in Scotland above all, the New Year was the greater festival, kept with more ceremony than Christmas itself, with its own customs of the first foot across the threshold in the new year, the dark stranger bringing luck, the whole rich apparatus of the Scottish New Year. In the English great house, the New Year was marked within the Christmas season, a further occasion of the long festival, the gathering to see the year turn, another night of the season's celebration. The house party might still be gathered, the 12 days not yet done, and the New Year kept as one more festivity of the season, the turning of the year marked in the midst of the Christmas gathering. It was a moment of some reflection amid the festivity, the turning of the year, the marking of time's passage, the old year measured and the new begun, set within the warmth of the continuing Christmas season. And the new year carried its own note, distinct from Christmas, the note of time and change and the passing years, the awareness of the turning of the world, the years going by. Christmas was warmth and gathering and the present joy of the season. The new year was the turning, the passage of time, the reckoning of the years. A more reflective note woven into the festival, the sense of time passing even amid the celebration, the old year gone forever, and the new one opening, unknown, ahead, and the two together, the Christmas and the New Year, made the fuller meaning of the season, the warmth and the gathering and also the turning, the present joy, and also the passage of time, the whole rich meaning of the midwinter festival, the celebration of the season, and the marking of the year's great turning. So the new year passed. Within the 12 days, the year turned, and the season ran on toward its end at Twelfth Night, the whole long festival of Christmas and the new year together filling the deep midwinter, the warmth and the gathering and the turning of the year, the great season of the dead of winter, kept in the great house in all its fullness, from the first preparations to the last night of all. And then, at the last, the season ended, and the ending had its own customs, for the taking down of Christmas was as marked, in its way, as the putting up of it. And it came with the end of the 12 days. The greenery came down at the end of the season, and there was a proper time for it, for the old belief held that the Christmas greenery must be taken down by a certain point, by 12th night or thereabouts, and that to leave it up beyond its time was unlucky. So at the end of the 12 days, on 12th night or the day after, the greenery was taken down, the holly and the ivy, and the fir stripped from the rooms, the garlands and the wreaths removed, the tree undressed and taken away, the whole green dressing of the season cleared out of the house, and with it went the whole festive apparatus, the decorations packed away, the house returned to its ordinary state, the season formally ended. There was something a little melancholy in the taking down, as there always is in the ending of a festival. The stripping of the greenery, the undressing of the tree, the packing away of the decorations, the bright festive house returning to its ordinary self. The season over for another year. The guests departed, the gathered family dispersing back to their own homes, the great house emptying of its Christmas company, returning to its ordinary, quieter life. The long season of preparation and festivity, the weeks of it, was over, and the house settled back into the ordinary round of the year. The winter still to be got through, the spring still far off, the great warm festival of Christmas past for another year. And the servants, who had labored so hard through the whole season, faced the great task of the clearing up, the putting away of the decorations, the cleaning of the house after the long festivities, the return of everything to its ordinary order, the last labor of the Christmas season falling, like all the rest, on them. The season that had been the family's long festivity had been the servants' long labor, and it ended for them in the clearing up, the taking down, and the packing away, and the cleaning, the last hard work of the Christmas that had been, for them, the hardest working season of the year. But the memory of it remained, the warmth of the season carried into the cold heart of the winter, the remembered pleasures of the Christmas that had been, to warm the long dark weeks that followed before the spring. For the Christmas was, among all its meanings, a warmth kindled at the dead of the year, a season of light and gathering and abundance set against the longest, darkest nights, and its warmth, once past, was carried in memory through the cold weeks after, the remembered brightness of the season, a comfort in the deep midwinter that followed it. The greenery came down, the guests departed, the season ended, but the warmth of it remained, remembered, carried forward, the light of Christmas kindled against the dark, and carried in memory through the winter still to come. So that was Christmas in a great English house in the 1880s, the whole long season of it, from the making of the puddings on Stir-Up Sunday to the taking down of the greenery on Twelfth Night. And I hope, having lived through the whole of it, you can see how much more it was than a single day. It was a season, a long unfolding festival of weeks, the preparation and the gathering and the 12 days of festivity, the whole rich stretch of midwinter celebration. It was the making of the modern Christmas, the tree and the cards and the crackers and the great family dinner, the season we still keep, taking shape in these very decades, in these very rooms. It was warmth and light and abundance kindled against the winter dark. The family gathered, the house decked and glowing, the feast spread, the children in their wonder, the whole warm heart of Christmas set against the cold and the dark of the year. Let us be fair to it at the last, in both directions, as we let it go. There was real warmth in it, real joy, real human goodness, and we should not let our awareness of its inequalities scrub that away. The family gathered in genuine love and pleasure. The children's wonder was real. The generosity, the charity, the reaching out to the poor and the estate was real, however imperfect. The servants' ball and the servants' Christmas held real warmth, real fellowship. The whole season was, at its heart, a genuine kindling of warmth and light and human togetherness against the dark of the year. And that warmth was real, and it is the same warmth we still reach for, and there is nothing false in it. And yet the warmth was not evenly shared, and we should not forget that either. The feast of the great house rose on the labor of its servants, who worked hardest of all at the season of the family's rest. And it rose beside the want of the poor, who kept a Christmas so different from the great houses as to be scarcely the same festival at all. The abundance and the ease and the wonder were the families, and the labor was the servants, and the want was the poor's, and the same season that was pure warmth and joy in the great house was hard labor below stairs and cold hunger a little way beyond the gates. The Christmas of the great house was a real warmth, and it was an unequal one, and both of those things were true, together, as they were true of everything in that age. But the warmth was real, and it is the warmth that has come down to us, the Christmas the Victorians made and handed on, the tree and the gathering and the feast and the light against the dark, kept now by people who never knew a great house or a servant's hall, the warmth outlasting the inequality, the season outlasting the world that shaped it. We keep their Christmas still, warmer and gentler and more widely shared than theirs, the good of it carried forward and much of the injustice left behind, the light they kindled against the midwinter dark, burning still in our own December. So picture it one last time, as we let it go. The great house at the height of the season on Christmas night, the feast done, the family gathered by the fire, the tree still glowing in the corner with the last of its candles, the greenery dark and fragrant about the rooms, the snow perhaps falling soft and silent beyond the windows, the children asleep upstairs, dreaming of the day, the servants below, their own long labor of the day at last done, gathered for their own moment of warmth in the hall. The whole house, above and below, held for this one night in the warmth of the season, the light kindled against the dark, the old festival kept once more in the deep midwinter, and outside The winter country, white and still under the falling snow. The great house glowing warm in the midst of it. One lit and living warmth in the vast cold dark of the winter night. Sleep well.